So we have rather different backgrounds where we started. You have your master's from the Courtauld. I started actually at Christie's while I was still doing my undergraduate degree. What do you think is the best advice that you've been given over this now long period of time?
Yeah, I've been given a lot of different pieces of advice, including one very important piece of advice from Wendy, which I'll touch on in just a second. But I was thinking back to different people that I've worked with over the years and very early initial advice. And one of my first internships in the art world was at a gallery in Boston, which had a print department. And I was told that to follow the owner of the gallery downstairs into the basement of the gallery. It was this rickety off Newbury Street, little really, and he was this quite proper Bostonian. And I remember thinking, oh my God, what job am I going to be given? And he was drinking a Dunkin' Donuts cup for all the Americans in the audience. It was about this full of iced coffee. And I'm thinking, am I going to be going out to get more of these things of coffee for him? You know, what is this job going to entail? And he showed me 2 stacks of prints that were just in their matting, and they had nothing else. And they were just, one stack was quite small, and one stack was huge. And he said, that's what you're going to be doing. And he said, those are the ones I know, which was the small stack of prints. And then those are the ones I don't know. And he said, you know, I said, what do you mean you don't know? He said, I don't know who made them. I don't know who the artists were. I don't know anything about them. So your job is to go out and find out what I don't know. And I just kind of looked blankly at him. He said, well, you could never know everything. And don't be afraid to say that you don't know everything. And he said, what I'm giving you today, or over the summer, I'm giving you the tools to find out what you don't know. And that meant going and basically putting myself at the mercy of these amazing women who worked in the art history department of that section at the Boston Public Library. And so that whole summer, I went and I said, I don't know. And they gave me the tools and the resources. And I realized that everything is a bit different now, that maybe we use libraries and that sort of thing less than we used to. But it was a fantastic summer of finding out what he didn't know and what I didn't know, and not being afraid to say, I don't know. But the second piece of advice, which I was given by Wendy, which is, it sounds a little bit flippant to say, but we can get very caught up in our worlds. We can get very caught up in trying to find a piece of art, or trying to close a deal, or trying to kind of run around, and inevitably things fall apart. And something I was complaining once to Wendy about, you know, this didn't happen and this, and I was so angsty about it. And she said, which I think is something that, a piece of advice that you were also given, was small children didn't die. Which basically, it sounds flippant, but it means take a step back and realize that this isn't the end of the world. This is just one small thing, and that no one was hurt here. This is not World War XVI that you're in the middle of. This is, you know, breathe, basically.
That's very true. That's a piece of advice I was given by an assistant when I worked in New York with Christie's. And I think it's very different when you're with an auction house, because the pressure is so great. It's very public. You have all the management screaming up budgets, everything else. And like I said, it's something that's just much more obvious and seen sort of day to day. I think since I've left, the one that you can move on from there is nothing is ever what it seems. And there's an awful lot of smoke and mirrors in the, dare I say it, in the art world. Some of the most successful people are ones you've never heard of. I think the best thing is, as Zoe and even Kat's already touched on, is Instagram isn't real. It's not the real world. And the fluff is wonderful, and the parties are fantastic, and the dinners are, but really the best thing to do is work as hard as you can, and that leads to just my bit of advice before you ask me what's the bit of advice that I would give, leading on, is that no experience is ever wasted. And that, I have a little anecdote on that one, which I will try and keep short, but it is one of my favorite. In fact, Kat might remember this. 100 years ago, when I was at Christie's and very junior.
Just after Kat started.
Exactly. And very junior, I was actually Nick McLean and I worked together then, and we carved up Europe together with Mark Baltimore. And Nick actually found or rediscovered a Caspar David Friedrich, the great German Romantic artist. And this was a very exciting thing in the 19th century world that I was in then, and the 19th century European art world. And the Getty Museum was very keen to see it. And that was very exciting to us. And they were very kind. And they said, well, we're not coming to you, but you don't actually have to come to us. You can come, we'll be in New York, so come out there. So I got the job to bring it, and it was so exciting. And it was my first time in a business class seat, and I got on there, and it was Virgin in the old days when it was just still upright seats. I had something that spread out like this. It was me. It was the painting had its own seat. It was in this carry case. Everyone was so confused. And as I was only going overnight, my carry-on was basically the entire contents of our library on Caspar David Friedrich. So every catalogue raisonné, every book that was ever written on the artist, every periodical, everything was there. And it was spread out in front of me for 7 hours. When I landed, I was the world expert on Caspar David Friedrich. I read every single one cover to cover. So I get to Christie's and Park Avenue in those days, which is what it was. We were going to show it in the boardroom. And I get there and I put it on the easel, and it's so exciting. And then I get a phone call from my great friend in London. I think enough time has gone now that I can name names here. But it was George Goldner who was coming to see, who was the former head of the Getty, chief curator, and who was coming to see the painting with two of his entourage. And a great friend of mine who was in the Old Master Department in London knew him extremely well and said, so are they there yet? And I said, no, not yet. And she said, okay, whatever you do, don't say a word. I'm like, are you kidding? And she said, he won't want to hear it. I thought, oh my gosh, I can't, but I'm the world expert, are you kidding? And so that's what happened, and they all filed in, and the picture was on an easel. He came in with his chief restorer, he came with his associate director, and they all took turns going up and looking at the painting. So here I am standing with my hands behind my back, biting my lip. No, I can't say a word. And finally, as they're all sitting in the window seats, and I just can't hold it back anymore, I just say, so, is it true that the Kimball is the only museum in America that has a Caspar David Friedrich? And the chief curate, the restorer, says, yes. And then the associate director says, yes. And George goes, really? And anyway, long story short, sure enough, they buy the painting. It is hanging in California now, if you'd like to see it. Made a record price at the time of close to $5 million, which is an extraordinary price then. George Goldner then went on actually to be the curator, or actually of drawings at the Met. And I've noticed that they now have a Caspar David Friedrich as well. They only come up every 10 years, if that. But the point of that story actually was, nothing is ever wasted, as I said. Every experience, the fact that I happened to look, well, because I read everything cover to cover, and that little bit of information came from the front of a museum exhibition catalogue. And that also kind of knows to know your client. That little bit of jealousy, I thought, yes, how can, someone else, the great Getty doesn't have a Caspar David Friedrich and the Kimball does, not possible. So, anyway, that's, and I think now as well, if you lead it into advising, it's kind of know your client, get into their head. You may assume a lot of things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they know. Even now, just quickly, sometimes with a client, if I'm buying a sort of mid-career artist, he knows certainly the more blue chip and the prime ones, but I sometimes group things with other works from his collection. When I send it off, I'll send it with 2 or 3 others around it, just so we can see it in context, and 9 times out of 10 that works.
I have to warn you, you have 1 minute left.
Oh, no.
So do you have
I thought that was a quick story. I'm so sorry. No, I'm done.
Do you have a quick last question for Morgan?
Okay.
Or either way.
Let me ask a very quick question to Wendy in terms of advising. We're going to do 1-sentence answers now. What has been...
Got it.
Done?
No, one.
Okay. So I work obviously within a larger organization. We do art investment, we do art lending. Obviously, we do a huge chunk of advisory. And I have, teams of colleagues. I have wonderful people that I work with every day. That can lead to a challenge in itself. But what is the challenge of working on your own as an advisor versus you were at Christie's for many years, and I have a whole team of people that I'm working with. What is the great challenge for you working on your own?
I think that probably is that I don't have I can't, with being discreet and not being able to show images around, you can't really bounce it off someone else. That's maybe the most sort of frustrating. But I think you probably share the same thing, just to jump on something really quickly about advising in general. You can be the best art advisor in the world, and there are so many things out of your control, it just won't matter. It's so frustrating how it's not an exact science, that you're not an engineer, that you're not an accountant even, and the whim of a client is everything. You know, their stock could have gone down by 0.001% that morning, or their mistress was mean to them the night before, or just anything could have happened, that they wake up that morning, they just don't want that picture, even though it's the best thing since
and it's
sliced bread.
exactly what they were asking you for. It's exactly what they said that they wanted. You hunted it down. Sweat, blood, and tears, finding it. And then...
Oh, I'm not sure about that little bit of red in the corner. And then they forget, and then a month later they come back, and of course it's sold. And you can't say you told you so.
But no experience is ever wasted.
Exactly. Because actually, you may go back to that picture for someone else. There is very true that even the valuations that you did for so many years that, sort of didn't come to anything, but somehow you'll always go back. Now, Morgan, I suppose, last question. Probably.
Very last.
What part of the market are you actually looking at and advising? What sort of artists or
interestingly,
area?
and I should have known that I was here amongst all these wonderful pictures of Phillips. But the answer I had prepared was, in fact, photography, and I think it's an accessible area of the market, more so than some. The price points we're dealing with a little bit lower, but there's so many fantastic and varied artists. Those can be, I was blown away by going to see a William Eggleston show recently at the Met. So if anybody's in New York, to go see the set of pieces that he did called Los Alamos, which just takes you back. There's something about photography that's very evocative, but also I just find it to be undervalued for the historical importance. There's a Desiree Dolveren in the back corner over there, who's somebody that I saw at a show in the Musée d'Élysée in Lausanne about 15 years ago, and I remember being hit by an image of hers, and they still do it today, and the value has risen immensely for those things. So I'd say photography is a great place to start. I'm working with a young collector right now who's bought all sorts of major painters and different kinds of artists. And then she said to me, she's like, look, I really want to focus on photography. And I just went, yes, this is great, because it's a chance for me to really dig deep and find things as well, and work with her to really build that into a larger group. So, and it just happens to be that we're surrounded with some lovely things today.